I pulled into my usual parking spot at work, letting Ripple by the Grateful Dead play to the very last note before shutting off the engine. As I stepped out, my eyes landed on the bright neon sign above the entrance, and a familiar wave of pride washed over me. Seeing Anderson Manufacturing in bold letters above the doorway never got old. The security guard gave me a nod as I walked past, making my way to my corner office on the top floor. It had been a decade since I first designed an efficiency control and monitoring system for HVAC units, a product that had since dominated 80% of the market. Over the years, we had rolled out other control and measurement technologies, but that first invention remained our biggest moneymaker. It had given me and my employees a comfortable living. 5 years ago, I introduced a profit-sharing program to keep my best people motivated and loyal. Thanks to the success of our patented systems, every employee enjoyed a 401k with a full company match up to 6%, plus a 15% year-end profit-sharing distribution. And in especially good years, they could take home an extra 10% after taxes. My CFO recently told me the company was now valued at $20 million. Not a month went by without some investment firm or venture capitalist reaching out to discuss a potential buyout. But I wasn't interested. I loved the work, loved the business, and loved the team we had built. Selling out just wasn't on my radar. I was too young for that, and honestly, life was good. At home, things had been just as great. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 14 years, and while the early days of starting the business had been tough, we had come out the other side stronger and more comfortable than ever. Emily worked part-time as a marketing consultant, often from home. At 5 feet 8 inches, with striking red hair and an incredible figure, she turned heads wherever she went. Her friends jokingly complained that life just wasn't fair, that she somehow managed to have the perfect body without even trying. On top of everything else, Emily had the kind of legs that seemed to go on forever. Our intimate life had always been great, but in the past 6 months, I couldn't help but notice a shift. What used to be 3 or 4 times a week had dwindled to just once. Lately, she also seemed glued to her phone, constantly texting someone. God only knew who. One evening, when I picked it up just to check the ball scores, I realized it was locked with a password. That was new. Neither of us had ever felt the need to do that before. I had brought up both the change in our intimacy and how she'd been acting quieter, more distant. She brushed it off, telling me I was just imagining things. She said she'd been feeling her age more, getting tired more easily, but that I shouldn't doubt how much she loved me. According to her, she loved me more than I could ever understand. We had talked about starting a family, and while she'd been hesitant, I made it clear how important it was to me. Eventually, she agreed. 5 months ago, she promised that in 6 months, she would stop birth control, and we'd start trying for a baby. She hadn't seemed as excited about it as I was, but I figured she was warming up to the idea. As I sat in my office, lost in thought, my friend and VP of Sales, Brian Carter, walked in looking uneasy. Brian and I went way back. We'd played soccer and hockey together in high school and stayed close through college. He wasn't my best friend, but we had a solid bond. That said, now that we worked together, our relationship was a mix of friendship and business. I treated my employees like partners, but at the end of the day, the final call was always mine. Brian poked his head into my office, looking miserable. "Boss, I feel awful today. Feels like the flu or something," he said, his voice hoarse. "If it's cool with you, I'm gonna head home and sleep it off. I'll either be back later or in tomorrow." He hesitated before adding, "I finished up the proposal for the new convention center, so we're good on that. I wrapped up the HVAC controls proposal and sent it out, so my plate's clear for the next few days," Brian added. "I'll see you tomorrow." "All right, Brian. Take care of yourself, and I hope you feel better," I told him as he headed out. With that, I got up to do my usual management walkthrough. Every couple of days, I made it a point to walk through different departments, sales and marketing, HR, and then out to the distribution and manufacturing areas. I always enjoyed spending time on the factory floor, chatting with the crew, getting their input, and hearing fresh ideas. It usually took me an hour or more, but I felt it was time well spent. After making the rounds, I headed back to my office, ready to dive into some strategy work. Lately, I'd been considering a new business line, so I pulled up my workstation to review my notes. But when I opened the file, I realized I had the outdated version. I remembered working on it over the weekend and saving the latest updates to my home computer. Rather than signing in through the VPN and uploading it to the company server, I figured it'd be easier to just have Emily pull it up and email it to me. I called the house, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried Emily's cell, but her phone was off. That struck me as odd, especially on a workday. Well, I thought, looks like I'm making the 20-minute drive. The weather was nice, and NPR was playing some good tunes, so I didn't mind the trip. But as I turned onto our block and pulled up to the house, something caught my eye. A car was in the driveway. A car that looked very familiar. It only took me a second to realize it was Brian's Lexus. I parked on the street, walked up the driveway, and carefully pushed open the front door. The house was quiet. No lights were on, no music playing. Emily wasn't at her desk in the study. I stepped into the kitchen. Empty. And then I heard it. Low voices. A soft moan. Coming from the master bedroom. My mind raced. My heart pounded. As much as I wanted to deny it, deep down, I already knew the truth. Someone was in my bed, with my wife. My hands clenched into fists, my pulse hammering in my ears. Without thinking, I reached for the 12-inch meat carver from the knife rack in the kitchen and gripped it tightly as I moved toward the stairs. Step by step, I climbed slowly, carefully. When I reached the hallway, I stopped just outside the bedroom door, keeping myself hidden behind the frame. They couldn't see me, but I could hear everything. They weren't just fooling around. They were talking. Cuddling. Then, I heard Emily's voice. "Brian, we can only do this a few more times. I think Jake's getting suspicious. He's noticed how distant I've been, how much I've been texting. And honestly, I feel guilty. I feel awful being with you one day and then going home to him the next." Her voice was soft, almost regretful. But then she added, "I have loved this, our little fling, for the last 4 months. It's been my one indulgence, my escape before I finally settle down, get off the pill, and start a family. But after today, and after the Denver conference, we're done." That hit me like a punch to the gut. 2 weeks ago, Emily had told me she was heading to a marketing conference in Denver. And now, it all clicked. Brian had a sales conference in Denver that very same weekend. This wasn't just an affair. They had a plan. I felt something inside me break. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and started recording. Slowly, I leaned forward, peeking around the doorframe. And there she was. My wife. Straddling Brian. Moving against him like she never had with me. His voice was low and breathless. "You love this, don't you? Being with me in his bed. You can't get enough of me. No one pleases you the way I do. Say it. Say it." That was it. I stepped into the room, still filming, my phone in one hand, the knife in the other. Without hesitation, I grabbed Emily by the hair, yanking her up and off of Brian. She let out a scream as I spun her around and shoved her onto the bed beside him. At first, she fought, her screams full of rage, until her eyes met mine. The moment Emily saw me, her eyes went wide, her mouth falling open in shock. Then she screamed, pure panic in her voice. "No. No, Jake, please. Dear God, no, it's not what you think. It doesn't mean anything." She scrambled to get up, reaching for me, while Brian tried to shift toward the edge of the bed, looking for a way out. But I wasn't having it. I held out the knife, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Both of you, sit back down." They froze. I said, "Sit the hell down and shut up before you end up with 12 inches of steel in your chest." They didn't hesitate. Both dropped onto the bed, yanking the sheets up around them. Emily burst into uncontrollable sobs, while Brian, his voice shaking, tried to explain. "Boss, listen, really, this was nothing. Just physical. Just a distraction. It didn't mean anything." Emily jumped in, her words spilling out in desperation. "Jake, I love you. This was just meaningless. It was nothing more than physical with Brian. It doesn't change the way I feel about us." She sniffled, reaching for me again, her face pleading. "It was just a last little fling. A way to get it out of my system before we settle down and start a family. Please, Jake. It's over now. Just send Brian away and come to bed with me. I'll make it up to you. Let me show you how much I love you." I stared at her, barely able to process what I was hearing. Had she completely lost her mind? "You're telling me this didn't mean anything?" My voice was calm, but inside I was breaking apart. "Well, I guess you just proved our marriage didn't mean a damn thing to you either." Emily's face crumbled. "You just showed me exactly how much respect you have for me. None. I trusted you. I believed in you. And this is what I get." I shook my head, disgusted. "You say you love me, but you've been screwing my employee for months. And in our bed. And now you expect me to just, what? Cuddle with you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Emily, I can barely look at you. And I swear to God, I will never touch you again." She flinched, recoiling at the anger and pain in my voice. For years, I had treated her like a queen, worshipped the ground she walked on, loved her, respected her, made her my everything. And now she knew exactly what she had done. And so did I. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and made a quick call. As soon as the other line picked up, I looked straight at Brian. "Janie, it's Jake," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I'm sending you a video right now. It's of your husband, Brian, in my bed, with my wife." I paused for a second, giving her a moment to process before I continued. "I don't know if you already knew he was cheating on you and the kids, but I'm so damn sorry you have to find out this way." There was silence on the other end before I finally hung up. Then I turned back to Brian. "Well, she says don't bother coming home. Apparently, this isn't the first time you've betrayed her and your family." I let out a bitter laugh. "And now you can add betraying your friend and your boss to the list." I shook my head in disgust. "You didn't just ruin your own marriage, you destroyed mine, too. What a worthless excuse for a man." Brian sat there, his face pale. I took a deep breath, my voice firm. "I'm giving you one chance to save your job. Tell me exactly when this started and how many times you two have been together." Before Brian could answer, Emily's voice cut in, desperate and pleading. "No, Jake, please. Don't make us go over that. It doesn't matter. It meant nothing. And it's over, right now." I turned and looked at her, my expression unreadable. She flinched, pressing herself back against the headboard, eyes darting away from mine as fresh tears streamed down her face. Brian cleared his throat, shifting nervously. "Jake, man, please. Don't throw away our friendship over this. And don't let it ruin the work I've done for the company." I just stared at him. He sighed. "Look, Emily means nothing to me. And I mean nothing to her. This was just lust, that's all. An illicit fling. We got caught up in it." He hesitated before continuing, his voice lower now. "This is the 4th time we've been together. The first time was when we were both in Denver for separate conferences. I knew she'd be there. We had talked about it at the company barbecue. So I got her number and called her that first night to grab dinner. I clenched my jaw, listening. We ate, drank too much, danced, and there was just this spark between us." He exhaled heavily. "That night, and the next, she came up to my room. He stopped himself, glancing at me nervously. "We slept together." I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around the phone. Brian continued, almost like he was confessing just to get it off his chest. Then, about a month later, Emily called me out of the blue. Brian let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. "A month after Denver, Emily called me. She said you'd be out of town for the day, checking out a new construction site, and asked me to come over." He hesitated. "We ended up in your bedroom." I felt my stomach churn. She got a thrill out of doing it in your bed," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. 3 weeks later, we booked a room at the Hilton. We had a lunch meeting that day, and afterward, well, we spent the afternoon together there. I could barely breathe. And today," he continued, "she called me again. Told me to call in sick. Said she needed me, that she was insanely turned on. So I came over." He swallowed hard, staring at the floor. "The plan was to make next month's Denver conference our last time. We were supposed to spend 3 nights together, get this out of our systems, and then stop." He shook his head. "We've both felt awful about this, about what we were doing to you and my family. Becky knows you want kids. She told me she promised you she'd go off the pill soon and start trying. So we agreed this was it. After Denver, we'd recommit ourselves to our marriages, put this all behind us." He looked up at me, his expression full of regret. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I knew this was wrong. And now I've destroyed my marriage and probably yours. And maybe even my career, unless you can somehow forgive us." Emily, still sitting on the bed, wiped her tear-streaked face and looked at me, her voice shaking. "Yes, Jake. I got caught up in the excitement of sneaking around. It had nothing to do with you. I love you. I've never loved anyone but you." I felt my hands trembling. "I want to have a family with you," she pleaded. "I want to grow old with you. You've always treated me like a queen. Being with Brian, it was fun, but it was nothing compared to being with you." Her voice cracked as she reached toward me. "Please, don't throw us away over a mistake. It didn't mean anything." Something inside me snapped. I took a step closer, my voice rising. "Nothing? It meant nothing?" I spat. She flinched. "Do you even know me?" My chest was heaving. "How could you possibly think that letting another man touch you, in our bed, would ever mean nothing to me?" Tears spilled down her face as I went on. "How do you expect me to get past this? To move on from the lies, the betrayal? To ever trust you again?" She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "How could you ever think that I would want to touch your cheating body again?" My voice was raw now, my hands clenched into fists. "How do you expect me to feel anything for you after this?" I shook my head, my voice raw with disbelief. "How do you expect me to feel the same way about you after this? The love, the bond, the connection we had, how do you not see that you've shattered all of it?" Emily sobbed harder, but I wasn't done. "Do you even realize the damage you've already done to our marriage? The distance between us? The lack of real conversations? The way our intimacy became just another chore for you, something to check off your damn to-do list." I clenched my fists. "A mistake is one drunken night. What you did, this," I gestured around the room. "This was a planned, calculated affair. You met him at out-of-town conferences. You brought him into our home, our bed." I took a step closer, my voice like ice. "That's not a mistake, Emily. That's a choice." For the first time, I saw something shift in her expression. A flicker of realization. Maybe, up until that moment, she hadn't truly understood what she had done. She had convinced herself it was meaningless, just a physical thing, something separate from us. Something that, somehow, wouldn't affect our marriage. Maybe, in some twisted way, she had even thought it would make us stronger. But now, as I spoke, I could see the truth settling in. She had pulled away from me, emotionally, physically, whether she meant to or not. And maybe the guilt she had tried so hard to bury had been eating away at her, chipping away at us without her even realizing it. She had told herself I would never find out. That my trust in her was too deep. That even if she was caught, I loved her so much I would forgive her. That she could just fix it, become the perfect wife, the devoted partner, start the family I wanted, and somehow it would all go away. But now, she saw how badly she had lied to herself. How she had justified this affair as some kind of last fling before settling down. And now she could see, clear as day, the pain, the disrespect, the sheer betrayal she had thrown at the man who had loved her more than anything. The man she claimed to want a future with. Her lips trembled as she looked at me, her face pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Have I ruined this?" Her eyes searched mine, desperate, terrified. Then, through her sobs, she choked out the only words she could find. Please, Jake, please. Forgive me. Emily sobbed, her voice shaking. Jake, I never meant to hurt you like this. I wasn't thinking. I didn't realize how devastating this would be. She wiped her face, but the tears kept coming. I never meant to disrespect you, I swear. I never wanted to cause you this kind of pain. I didn't say a word. Instead, I held up my phone and hit play. Her own voice filled the room, breathless and full of desire. Yes, Brian. No one makes me feel the way you do. Don't stop. I stopped the video and looked her dead in the eye. How? I said, my voice dangerously calm. Can you possibly tell me you weren't disrespecting me when you were saying that? She let out a strangled sob, shaking her head, but I wasn't done. You weren't just cheating on me, I continued, my voice filled with pure disgust. You were with this pathetic excuse of a man, in our bed, our home. And you loved it. I turned to Brian, my expression cold and final. I lied earlier, I told him. There's no saving your job. Don't bother coming in tomorrow. You're fired. Now get the hell out of my house. Brian paled but didn't argue. He knew better. He slid to the edge of the bed, fumbling to gather his clothes. Emily started to move too, but I snapped at her. Stay right where you are, I said, my voice like steel. Sit there in those filthy sheets, you cheating liar. She froze, pressing herself back against the headboard. Her face crumpled as she looked at me, seeing everything, the pain, the betrayal, and the pure hatred in my eyes. Her chest heaved, and for the first time I saw real fear. Oh my God! I saw the thought flicker across her face. What have I done? How did I take a man who loved me so much, and turn that love into hate? Brian didn't waste another second. Clutching his clothes to his chest, he bolted, rushing down the stairs and out the door. Moments later, his car roared to life, and he sped off down the street. Silence. I turned back to Emily. She stared at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. Then I felt something snap inside me. I broke. The tears came hard and fast, years of love and trust shattering in an instant. Emily jumped off the bed, rushing toward me, her arms reaching out. Jake, please. But I stepped back, my stomach twisting in revulsion. I couldn't even look at her. Without thinking, I lifted the knife between us, not to hurt her, but to keep her away. She stopped in her tracks, staring at me in horror. Then, for the first time, she looked down at herself, saw the evidence of what she had just done. And in that moment, she saw herself exactly the way I did. A cheater. A liar. Someone who had betrayed everything we built. A broken sob tore from her throat, and she turned, stumbling toward the bathroom. She slammed the door, locked it, turned on the shower, and collapsed onto the floor. She hoped, prayed, that if she just gave me space, I would calm down. That we could talk about this. But she didn't understand. There was nothing left to talk about. Emily sobbed in the shower, her body shaking as she tried to wash away the shame and regret. For 30 minutes, she scrubbed her skin raw, as if that could somehow erase what she had done. When she finally stepped out, she wrapped herself in a towel, dried off, and slipped into her robe. Taking a deep breath, she slowly cracked open the bathroom door, bracing herself for another round of Jake's fury. She deserved it. Every last bit of it. But the room was silent. Frowning, she peeked into the hallway. The entire house was eerily quiet. Her voice trembled as she called out, "Jake, I'll set up the spare bedroom for you. I'll stay away for as long as you need, until you're ready to let me talk, to explain, to beg for your forgiveness." Nothing. No footsteps. No response. Dread settled in her stomach as she turned back to the bedroom. Their bedroom. That's when she saw it. Jake's dresser drawers were open and empty. His side of the closet was practically bare. The 2 large suitcases they kept stored in the back? Gone. Her breath hitched as she slowly turned toward the bed, toward the spot where he had stood just hours before, filled with heartbreak and rage. And there, buried deep into her pillow, was the 12-inch butcher knife. The blade sank through the fabric, straight into the mattress, like a statement carved in steel. Her knees buckled. Jake was gone. And all she could do now was pray. Pray that he wouldn't do something reckless. Pray that he would take her calls when he finally calmed down. If he ever calmed down. She staggered into the guest bedroom, collapsed onto the bed, curled into a tight ball, and sobbed until exhaustion finally pulled her under. Meanwhile, I spent the night at my office, tossing and turning on the stiff leather couch in the conference room. Sleep barely came. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was them, her, betraying me in the worst possible way. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I reached out to HR and security, officially terminating Brian. A few hours later, he actually had the audacity to show up at the office, acting like I had just fired him in the heat of the moment and things would blow over. He was dead wrong. Security met him at the front, took his badge, and escorted him straight to his car. Before he could argue, they made it clear, if he ever stepped foot on company property again, the police would be involved. I didn't even bother to watch him leave. Instead, I locked myself in my office, sitting alone at my desk, staring at nothing. There was only one thought in my mind, one undeniable truth. I had loved Emily with everything I had. But no matter how much I loved her, our marriage was over. No matter how much I tried to process it, I knew one thing for sure. I would never feel the same way about her again. The spark? Gone. The trust? Shattered. That deep, unbreakable connection, the one where I had given her my heart, my soul, was destroyed beyond repair. And without that, our marriage would be nothing more than a hollow, broken mess, a pathetic attempt at pretending we could ever be what we once were. Call it pride. Call it anger. Call it jealousy. It didn't matter what label you slapped on it. The truth was simple. I had been disrespected too deeply to ever believe she still loved me the way a wife should love her husband. How could I move forward with someone who had proven she didn't value me? How could I ever trust her again? Starting a family with her now would be insanity. It was over. That morning, I called my CFO into the office. We spent 4 hours going over every detail of the company's value and my plans moving forward. When I finally told him what had happened, about Brian, about Emily, he sat there, stunned. "Jake," he said, shaking his head, "please, don't do anything rash. Give yourself a few weeks to let this settle before making any big decisions." But my mind was already made up. Meanwhile, as the morning sun crept through the blinds, Emily woke up alone in the spare bedroom. And the moment her mind caught up with reality, the crushing weight of what she had done hit her full force. She could still see the look on Jake's face, the pain, the devastation, the betrayal. Her stomach twisted. My God, how could I have been so stupid? She sat up, burying her face in her hands as the ugly truth settled in. She had risked her entire marriage, her future, for what? A few meaningless, mediocre hookups with a man she barely liked, let alone loved? She wanted to scream. What the hell was wrong with her? But one thing was clear, she had to fix this. Somehow. She had to get Jake back. She had to make him see that they could get past this, that they could go back to the way things were before she had thrown it all away. Deep down, she was sure, Jake loved her too much to leave her. Even though she had promised to give him space, she couldn't help herself. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. Heart pounding, she left a message. "Jake, I am so sorry. I love you more than anything. I know I hurt you, and I am ashamed of what I did." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to keep going. "But, Jake, you love me. And I love you. We can get through this. Please." She swallowed hard, her breath shaky. "Please, Jake. Just don't shut me out." Her voice cracked as she whispered into the phone, "I'll do anything, Jake. Anything to make this right." She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I promise. I'll be the best wife, the best mother. You know that's what I want. Please, just call me. Or come see me. I need you, Jake. Please, just talk to me." But there was no reply. Not that day. Not the next. By the third day, the silence was unbearable. Desperate, she called his office. His executive assistant, Brenda, picked up. Brenda had always been fiercely loyal to Jake, practically idolized him. And now, Emily could hear the ice in her voice the second she answered. "Jake is busy," Brenda said bluntly. He's given strict instructions not to take any personal calls. Emily's heart pounded. Brenda, please, He would appreciate being left alone, Brenda cut in, her tone sharp. Until he decides otherwise. Emily swallowed hard. Brenda hadn't actually said Jake would eventually be ready to talk. But Emily clung to that idea anyway, telling herself it was only a matter of time. For now, she had no choice but to wait. That afternoon, her phone rang. Chad. She hesitated before answering, already knowing what he wanted. Hey, he said cautiously. So, I take it you know Jake fired me. Emily exhaled sharply. Yeah, Chad. I know. And Janie kicked me out, he added, his voice a mix of frustration and exhaustion. I'm back at my parents' place. She didn't respond. There was a pause before he said, Listen, I think we should talk. Maybe we can figure out a way to get Jake to forgive us. If we... Don't call me again, Emily snapped, cutting him off. I don't ever want to see you or talk to you. We're done. She hung up, shaking with anger. Deep down, she knew blaming Chad wasn't fair. She had made her own choices, and she was just as guilty. Maybe even more. But she still couldn't wrap her head around it. Why did I do this? How could I have been so stupid? How had she risked everything for something so meaningless? A week passed. The silence was suffocating. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She dialed Jake's cell, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. But instead of ringing, a recorded message played. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Her stomach dropped. Panic rising, she called his office again. This time, Brenda didn't even bother with pleasantries. Emily, stop calling. And just like that, the line went dead. Emily stared at her phone, the rejection cutting through her like a knife. No. She wasn't going to just sit back and let this happen. If Jake wouldn't talk to her, she had only one choice. She had to go on the offense. At first, Emily had wanted to keep the affair private. She had assumed, hoped, that Jake wouldn't want his friends and family to know he had been cheated on. But now, she was desperate. She started reaching out to his friends, calling each one, asking if they knew where he was or what he was thinking. Every single one of them shut her down. All they said was that Jake had made it clear, this was a private matter between him and her. The coldness in their voices, the complete lack of sympathy, told her everything she needed to know. Jake had told them. And just like that, the shame and humiliation she had been trying to bury crashed down on her again. Finally, she called his parents. Maybe, just maybe, he had gone to stay with them. But the moment they answered and heard her voice, they hung up. Emily's heart pounded as she called back. This time, they didn't even pick up. It went straight to voicemail. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. Jake's own parents wouldn't even speak to her. Panic rising, she grabbed her keys and drove straight to his company. She knew security wouldn't let her past the front desk, so she put on her most desperate, pleading face and begged them to at least let her wait in the lobby. Eventually, they called up to his office. A few minutes later, Brenda, his assistant, walked in. Her expression was unreadable as she stopped in front of Emily and crossed her arms. "What do you want?" Emily's throat tightened. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she forced herself to speak. "I need my husband to come down here and talk to me. Right now." Brenda didn't move. Emily's voice wavered, but she pushed on. "He owes me that much. He needs to respect his wife enough to face me, to let me explain." Brenda's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked disgusted. "Respect his wife?" she repeated coldly. Then she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make sure the words hit hard. "Like you respected him?" Emily flinched. Brenda shook her head. "Maybe you should take a hard look at what you've done. Either way, it doesn't matter. Jake's gone." Emily's stomach dropped. "What?" "He sold the company, left the area, and made sure no one tells you where he is." Emily felt like the floor had vanished beneath her. Desperate, she emailed him. Both addresses bounced back. Calls to his parents? Blocked. He had erased every trace of himself. Weeks passed in silence. When she couldn't take it anymore, she hired a private investigator. Jake had sold everything, closed their accounts, and disappeared. The only thing he left behind? The house, transferred into her name. No one would say a word about him. 8 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived. Inside, his wedding ring, shredded wedding photo, divorce papers, and a letter. Emily, you thought we could move past this, that your betrayal was just a mistake. But you never understood the pain you caused. I could never trust you again. Never touch you again. In case you forgot, I've enclosed a copy of the video. Your words, your actions, destroying everything we had. You never took responsibility, so I sent the truth to our friends and family. I don't feel good about it. But I had no other choice. Now I'm done. You will never hear from me again. Goodbye, Emily. She collapsed, clutching the letter. It was over. 5 years passed. True to his word, Jake never returned. No calls. No messages. No trace. Even through the divorce, there was no contact. He left her the house and a settlement. The rest, his $22 million, was gone, untouchable. The video had destroyed her reputation. The shame was suffocating. Therapy helped, but dating was impossible. Every relationship felt hollow. Over time, Jake faded from her memories, his voice, his touch, his laughter. Until, one day, it felt like he had never been there at all.